All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're building the ultimate visual cheat sheet for the full bench formula. If you've ever stared at labor laws or accounting formulas and just felt completely lost, don't worry, you are in the right place. We're going to break this whole thing down step by step, and we'll start with the absolute chaos this formula was actually designed to fix. So here is our roadmap. We'll look at the pre-1950s chaos, figure out the gross profit, deduct those prior charges, calculate the shareholder return, and then finally nail down that bonus split. Starting right off with Section 1, the pre-1950 bonus chaos, a system with absolutely zero science behind it. And this slide really hits the nail on the head regarding how illogical things used to be. Just imagine putting your blood, sweat, and tears into a super profitable company. The owners are literally raking it in. But come bonus season, they hand you nothing and tell you, hey, just be glad you have a job. But then, right down the street, workers at a struggling company barely keeping the lights on might actually get a bonus, just because their boss wants to buy goodwill or, is terrified of a strike. It was totally arbitrary. There was no formula, no consistency, just zero science. So to fix this absolute mess, the Labor Appellate Tribunal set up a full bench in 1950. Their mission? Create a scientific, reproducible method to figure out what a fair bonus actually looks like. And, spoiler alert, they nailed it. The formula was so solid that the Supreme Court gave it the green light in the famous 1959 Associated Cement Company's case. In fact, it's held up so well that it remains the gold standard today, literally baked into the Code on Wages from 2019. Okay, let's look at the math. Section 2. Step 1. Gross profit, or the top of the funnel. Now, if you want to master this, keep this mental roadmap handy. Think of the whole process like a giant funnel. We're going to pour the money in at the top and filter down through these 5 specific steps, systematically peeling away layers of cash until we find the actual fair bonus amount at the very bottom. We start at the very top with gross profit. Now, this is the massive raw pool of money. It's absolutely everything the business brought in over the year before a single solitary deduction is made. No taxes have been paid yet, no equipment costs have been factored in. It's just the pure, raw number. But as anyone running a business knows, you can't just hand all of that out. Which brings us to Section 3, deducting prior charges, the first filter. From that massive, raw number, we have to subtract 3 very specific charges to find the actual usable cash. First up, depreciation. Machines wear down, buildings age. That's a real cost to the business, even if no cash physically left the bank this year. Second is income tax. That's money legitimately owed to the government. You obviously can't distribute what legally belongs to the state. And third, any development rebate or investment allowance, basically tax benefits for buying new equipment. Now, putting on our critical thinking hats for a second, we really have to ask, why deduct these exact items first? Why do they get priority over the worker's bonus? Well, the key takeaway here is that the company never actually earned that full gross profit to begin with, not in a freely usable way anyway. Taxes, the physical wearing down of essential machinery, these were ironclad obligations committed way before any true profit could be realized. If the factory floor is literally grinding into dust, you have to account for that before handing out rewards. Once we filter those out, we get a much, much more realistic picture. Moving right along to Section 4, the shareholders' fair return, rewarding the risk. Now we have to talk about the people who funded the whole thing. So, the formula says we now need to deduct a reasonable return on the paid-up and working capital. And the architects of this formula locked that rate in at a very specific, and honestly pretty conservative, 6%. And again, you're probably wondering, why exactly 6%? Why not 2? Why not 20? It's actually pretty clever. It's not about being overly generous to the owners, it's just a fair nod to the risk they took. Think about it. If those shareholders had just taken their cash and safely parked it in a bank's fixed deposit instead of risking it to build a factory, hire people, and run this business, they would have earned a similar safe return. The formula just acknowledges that taking the plunge to build a business deserves at least that basic baseline return before we start carving up the bonus profits. All right, Section 5. The final bonus split, creating the allocable surplus. Now, after clearing out those prior charges and the shareholder returns, we finally hit the available surplus. This is the money actually on the table, and the formula dictates a really interesting negotiated balance. It takes 60% of that surplus to create the allocable surplus. That's the worker's bonus pool. The company keeps the other 40. Oh, and a quick side note, banking companies actually use a slightly different ratio of 67% for workers, but standard businesses stick to the 60-40 split. Which, of course, begs the obvious question, why only 60%? Why not just take that entire available surplus, the whole shebang, and hand it straight to the employees who did the work? Because the formula is fiercely pragmatic. It knows a business has to survive past this one single year. The company genuinely needs that remaining 40% as internal reserves. They need it to weather the storm during bad years, to reinvest in new tech, and to keep growing. Because if they don't grow, there won't be jobs, let alone bonuses down the road. It's a really delicate balancing act between rewarding labor today and sustaining the enterprise for tomorrow. So finally, Step 5 distributes this pool, and the law puts some very strict guardrails in place. If that allocable surplus is huge, employers pay out a maximum of 20% of a worker's wage. They cap it right there. But here's the crucial protection. If the surplus is tiny or even zero, employers are still legally on the hook for an 8.33% minimum bonus, even if they have to pull from past accumulated funds, what they call set-on funds, or literally dig into their own pockets. That 8.33% is an absolute non-negotiable floor. So, if you want just one single overarching principle to remember how this entire framework operates, just ask this. After the company has met its genuine obligations and given shareholders a fair, basic return, how much is actually left? Once you find that number, you hand the workers 60% of it. It's brilliant, it's highly structured, and honestly, it's just completely logical. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to chew on. We're living in this era of chaotic, totally unregulated gig economy wage disputes, right? Drivers and freelancers often feel exactly like those pre-1950s workers, just completely at the mercy of arbitrary algorithms and systems. So could reviving a highly structured scientific formula, something exactly like this 1950s standard, be the key to solving the modern gig economy wage crisis? It is absolutely something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this visual breakdown has brought some real clarity to the full bench formula.